Welcome to Real Voices of Recovery. I'm your host, Justin. The idea of this podcast got started because I believe that we all have a story that needs to be shared with each other to bring light and hope into our lives, and that recovery is possible. And it takes a tribe of community of others, of like-minded people to make that possible. So welcome to Real Voices of Recovery. Tonight we have Britt joining us from Rhode Island, and we'll get right into it. So Britt, tell us, what was it like growing up? Did you already live in Rhode Island your whole life?
Oh yeah, that's the thing with Rhode Island. Like once you live here, you're kind of stuck here for a while. But yep, born and raised in a very small town, and my father owns a local business, so everybody knew us. I'm the oldest of three, and family life, it was very traditional. Like my mom was a stay-at-home mom, my dad's a workaholic, and he owns a funeral home. So growing up, I was often like faced with a lot of death, and but not only that, I also got to see how people were remembered.
Hmm.
And even like as like a toddler, I took that with me, and I just kept on thinking like, well, how do I want to be remembered when I die? And I just wanted to be remembered as perfect. So it was like always about that seeking that constant validation from other people. I went to a small private school in a town that's about 20 minutes away. So I didn't know any of the local kids, and people at that school were from all over the state. But I always kept people at a distance. I never felt like I fit in.
Hmm.
Um, I just always felt less than, like I'm not worth having a best friend. Like I remember growing up and seeing all these movies and everyone had their BFF or whatever. And I never had that. But it's also like the other end, like I distanced myself from people because I didn't want to be hurt if they left.
Hmm.
Because I saw a lot of people, a lot of death. So in my head, I'm like, they're all going to leave me eventually.
Wow. So it was, from far back as you can recollect, it was like this level of being uncomfortable and kind of just disconnection from the world around you.
Yeah. And I was a very quiet kid because I didn't want anyone to not like me. I cared a lot about that. And I didn't want to be a nuisance to my parents. I was a very obedient rule follower, but I also didn't know how to express myself.
Hmm. It seems to be like a common trend with a lot of us, when it comes to whatever you choose to call it, the demon, the disease of addiction, the whatever label we want to put on. It always seems like we weren't able to, we just didn't feel like we belonged anywhere. We had a hard time socially. I know for me, very quiet, still am to this day,
Mm-hmm.
and just always uncomfortable. And do you feel like at any point like you recognize that, or you just thought this is just how it is?
I think I fell into a lot of self-pity back then. I didn't know exactly what it was, and I didn't know any different. I didn't, my parents weren't very well versed in mental health at all. It was the 90s. So the awareness hadn't come about yet.
Mm-hmm.
I also have inattentive ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
So I automatically felt less than because I'm like, why can't I focus? Why can't I get what the other kids get? Why can't I clean my room? Like for example, when all the awareness came about, like with learning disabilities, I went to my mom. I'm like, Mom, I think I have ADHD. And she's like, you don't have ADHD. You have LAS, lazy ass syndrome. And immediately I'm like, okay, I'm never telling you anything again.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so there was that constant invalidation of any thought I had. And they didn't mean it. Like a mother of three kids, she's on autopilot.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't hold any resentment towards her.
That's good.
Yeah.
So was there any point where, when you were in school, did any teachers like point out, or any of your peers like point out kind of what you're talking about, like this social discomfort, or maybe, like you're saying, ADHD or anything like that?
I remember on a lot of report cards, they would say like daydreaming out the window. Like it was very subtle because I wasn't vocal about it. Because I made up in my mind that if I say something and it's wrong, I'm gonna get made fun of.
Mm,
Because a lot of times that's what happened at home. My father is a typical Italian dad, ball buster. But as a kid, I didn't know any different.
hmm
So I took a lot of what he said to heart. And a lot of people just said I was a quiet kid. I actually got best personality in high school, ironically. But no one ever actually saw my personality. They just saw this version of myself, this shell of a human being. And I didn't bother anyone. And I guess that was socially acceptable.
hmm And you feel like over time, like the disconnection and not want to be social and these things kind of started to drive you away from people, like isolation or anything like that?
Yes, I'm also bipolar too. So it kind of went hand in hand. I have more bipolar depression than the mania. Um, I just I didn't have the social skills to interact with other people. I
Mm,
wasn't extroverted. I was a very quiet kid. I went through a binge reading phase for the
mhm.
longest time. I thought it was normal to read 2 to 3 books a night. I guess it wasn't. So,
Right.
right. And because I thought I was going to miss out on something. That's another thing I struggled with. I wanted to always be somewhere because I wanted to know what was happening as a result of a lot of traumas.
So I can tell you that me personally, I can identify a lot with that. And I guarantee you a lot of people listening who have yet to be able to find their voice to express what you're saying are going to take a lot from this. So let me ask you, so at what point did you start to like find escape from the feelings? Like what was the first thing you could identify that helped you with that, you felt like?
The first was food. So when I was 8 years old, my mom took me from a yearly physical to the doctor. And afterwards, he pulled her aside and said, your daughter needs to start watching what she's eating because she's too heavy for her age and her height. And I'm 8 years old. This is second grade. And but all I heard when he said that was there is something wrong.
Hmm.
And as a result, I was restricted as far as like diets, going gluten free at a young age, which I had to eventually. But I'm a kid. I didn't care about this stuff. I just wanted my sweets. I wanted my snacks. So I began to hoard food and overeat. But with overeating, it's not exactly something you can hide. It shows up one way or another. And so I guess that's really where it started. And especially during middle school, I went through a severe depression. I didn't know how to tell anyone there is something wrong with me
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know what's happening.
Mm-hmm. And kind of like you say, you feel like you lack the social skills. And
Mhm.
I think sometimes what happens is we have all these things in our mind. We have no idea how to express them
Mhm.
for anyone to understand those things.
Mm.
And, so did it progress? Like went from food and then what did it look like?
So that progressed until about 16. I was extremely heavy, and one day there was almost like a switch in my brain, and I went the other way with it. I went full blown bulimia, anorexia. I would research on pro anacytes, how to be better at it. I was deep. Everything involved in that realm, I did. As far as diet pills, laxatives, uh, compulsive exercising. And within 2.5 years, I lost over 100 pounds and I got pretty underweight, got very sick. And, but in my head, I actually thought, this is how I thought. I thought, well, at least I'm not going to die the fat girl.
Mm,
And I remember just praying at night to God, like, God, just take me. Just don't let me live anymore because I didn't see a way out. Um, because within my family, there isn't a lot of substance use. It's more like underlying addictions, like processing addictions, gambling, workaholism, raging. eating disorders. Um, so I wasn't like a red flag for anybody
Mhm.
until it was too late.
It sounds like, because there's a lot of discussion on, what's the core root, where does it come from, what really is it? And I think it sounds like there's a common theme, like this is a family disease, right? It
Mm.
manifests maybe differently for everyone. And I think that's a really good thing that you're talking about those things, because I believe a lot of society believes that people choose to do certain things, or it's some type of moral thing.
Mhm.
And I don't believe that, and so, it goes from, eating to eating disorder.
Mhm.
Where did it take you after that?
When I was at my lowest, I had to drop out of college because I had lost that cognitive ability to do any work. My body was slowly shutting down. My limbs would fall asleep all the time because my heart wasn't strong enough to pump to the limbs of my body. So I was pretty much dying.
Wow.
And I told my parents, I'm like, I I have to I have to withdraw. I have to go home. And my mom was like, well, why? And I remember my dad screaming, because she's gonna die, just flat out. Because I find with a lot of parents, their first reaction is anger
Hmm.
because they don't know how to deal with their fear. Um, and so I got home, and it was February, and I was watching the Dr. Oz show just because I wanted to see what he said one day. So I went to his website, and in the far right corner, there was a text box that said, "Do you struggle with an eating disorder? Tell us your story." And I'm like, oh, what the heck? Maybe it's for data or whatever. So
Hmm.
I start typing away. And I sent it, and I honestly forgot about it until a couple days later when a producer called me and she invited me on the show. And I thought it was a prank. I didn't really believe her until I got the itinerary in my email. I'm like, oh crap, I'm going to be on national television. So,
Wow.
like I said before, my cognitive ability was very limited. So I was kind of on autopilot during this time.
Hmm.
Um, I'm writing my memoir right now, and I just finished that chapter. I had a really hard time remembering anything, because that's how malnourished my brain was. So I went to New York and we taped the show, and I was on the show with three other women. Two unfortunately passed away due to the disease. And the other one I'm still very, very good friends with, thankfully. But at the end of the show, they offered us all a full ride scholarship to treatment.
Wow.
And I remember looking at my friend, and like we both had like that uh-oh like feeling, like almost like panic because we didn't know before the show. And so they all said yes. I said no on the show because I was still deep in denial, right? Don't even know I am lying. And it took me a couple weeks, and then I was purging in the bathroom and I threw up blood.
Mm.
Now it wasn't like a lot, but it was enough to for me to step back and be like, I can't continue like this.
Mm.
I was actually afraid of myself. So I ended up going to treatment, and it was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life, if not the hardest thing. And I was white knuckling it for 2 years about, and then I found out, and because I just turned 21.
Hmm.
And for me, alcohol started a lot later because I was afraid of the calories before. And once I started drinking, I drank for an effect immediately. I never liked the taste. I drank to black out, check out, and get out. And it went from 0 to 60 real fast. Within 2.5 months, I totaled two cars and I was sexually assaulted. And especially after that event, I didn't care what happened to me because I had people close to me saying like, "Oh, you should have been more careful." So I thought it was my fault. I internalized that and I drank over. And especially growing up with such a sheltered upbringing, that event for me was very traumatic. And it didn't take very long till I discovered cocaine,
Mm-hmm.
and I they went hand in hand because it allowed me to drink, or so I thought. It allowed me to drink longer and more, kept the party going,
Mm-hmm.
and I wasn't really functioning very well. I thought because I'm like, oh, I kept my job, but I didn't have a license. I got the DUI. I didn't have a car anymore. And after a year, maybe a little less than a year, my parents kicked me out of the house because they were sick of me.
Mm-hmm.
Understandably, I was a nightmare. I was hiding alcohol everywhere in that house. And then I was homeless for about 4 months. I didn't know where I would be spending the night. And it didn't click until the guy I was seeing, he picked me up. And I asked him, like, oh, are we going to go home first? Are we going to go out to eat? And he's like, home? You don't have a home.
Wow.
And that's when it hit me. I'm like, I don't have a home. I don't have anywhere I belong. Once again, I'm an outsider.
Mm-hmm.
And I was deep, deep, deep into the alcoholism. Like I couldn't go more than maybe 5 hours without drinking it tops. The withdrawals in between were insane. And I was a hairdresser. I was cutting people's hair like this. It's a miracle I haven't. Um, and that just escalated. I eventually got an apartment, but all I had in that apartment was a mattress on the floor. And because I didn't have any money left over after using. I remember counting change just so I could get a can of beans from the gas station down the street to eat something that day. And I don't think I thought too much about it because I was in survival mode.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just terrifying. Um, and I thought that, because I was just scholarship to from the Dr. Oz show, what a blessing that was. And here I am messing everything up.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like that shame
Mm-hmm.
prevented me from getting help sooner because I was so embarrassed. I was so embarrassed I couldn't commit suicide because I was too embarrassed for someone to find me like that. But I wanted to every day. So I drank to forget.
Mm-hmm.
And that lasted until April of 2016. And I got this text from my mom one day asking me if I had seen my sister. And my sister had dropped out of college the October before. Extreme anxiety. She stopped sleeping. She was really struggling mentally. Never had a substance issue though. But when I got that text, it's like I felt something within me. Like I knew what was about to happen. She was found 5 days later, and she had taken her own life. She was 21 years old, and that was my little sister. And I had to put down drinking for a couple weeks because I had to help plan the funeral. Because I make up that she knew I would know what to look for her. So, for instance, with her laptop, her password was "When you say you love me." I know that meant that's what she wanted for her funeral song. So it's like little hints that other people probably wouldn't have picked up on, but because I had been there time and time again, I knew. And so after the services were over, I tried to go back to drinking. And for some reason that I still have no explanation to this day, I started to get really sick.
Mm.
I started to throw up a lot. And at this point, I'm a seasoned alcoholic. Like I know what I'm doing. I have my routine down. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't working. And I was looking back at like probably years ago now, but I look back at history and I tried to get I tried to go to a meeting the July before I got sober.
Mm.
I got sober January 2017. And that day I just woke up. And once again, I was terrified of myself. And I would had this thirst, but it wasn't for alcohol. It was for spirituality. It was for something greater than myself. And I remember being in that parking lot of the meeting and giving myself almost like a pep talk because this is Rhode Island. Everybody knows everybody. So I'm like, okay, if you go in there, there's a good chance you're going to know somebody. If you go in there, they're going to see you. And if you don't show up again, it's going to look bad on you. So it was like this whole hamster wheel in my head. And I remember he was my boyfriend then, but he's my fiance now. He called me. He's like, where are you? I'm like, I'm in the parking lot of the AA meeting. He's like, are you okay? I'm like, no, I'm in the parking lot of the AA meeting. And so anyway, but I've done a bunch of different fellowships anyway. And I went and I just kept going.
Mm.
And to me, it doesn't matter what fellowship anyone chooses, if one at all. I think people just need other people that get it.
Mm.
And I also found bodybuilding. So I swapped one addiction for another, because that's what I do. And I was all in with it. I trained for 3 years naturally. And then the fourth year, I chose to not be natural anymore because I made up if I want to get to the level that I want to be at, I need to use performance enhancing drugs. And the typical addict I am, I was lying to my coach about how much I was using. I was doing everything and anything I could. It was 2 weeks away from my show. I trained for the show for 4 years, one show, and it was canceled because of COVID.
Mm.
And that it was like an identity crisis because in the beginning, I never developed my identity sober
Mm-hmm.
because I placed it into bodybuilding. So it was almost like I was right back to, I think I was 4 years sober at that point. So it was like right back to being newly sober. Like I
Mm-hmm.
felt raw, I felt uncomfortable, didn't know who the heck I was. And I started to eat. And when you're that lean, your body is so depleted, it's like a carnal desire. It's part of it is natural, and then my other part is naturally the addict in me.
Mm-hmm.
And oh gosh, it was just awful. And I didn't know how to stop. And so I went back to treatment, the same treatment center, and I was good there. And then I did the same exact thing. I got out, didn't do any work. I didn't work on myself. And finally, this was up to last year, and my fiance kind of gave me an ultimatum, like something needs to change or we're not going to make it. And to hear that just broke my heart. And so I got abstinent August 9th, 2022 with that. But it's interesting how when I got healthier, some people didn't like it.
Mm.
And I was working for my father at that time, and I didn't I didn't realize a bunch of things. Like took me a long time to learn this, but he's a narcissist. And then all of a sudden, when I made that discovery, so much of my past with my addiction, with my personality made perfect sense. Because the thing with them is they condition you to think that's normal.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, I had to make another career change. And I decided to go into the recovery field. And I got my coaching certification. I started my own business. Now I'm working for a wonderful local treatment center. And I just got promoted to operations manager.
Oh, congratulations.
And it's the most rewarding job I have ever had. And sure, I get physically exhausted, but I'm not mentally exhausted at all because
Mhm.
these are my people. And it's just been such a blessing. When I told the guys, because I work at an all male facility, when I told them that I was going to step up, they all clapped. And I had to hold back tears
Mhm.
because it's been such a blessing, such a dream come true. And it's funny how things come full circle because so my first sponsor, she passed away. And this was like a couple years ago. This treatment center I'm working for, she donated her house to.
Wow.
And I'm like what? Like I didn't even know that when I before I started there. And it's just, God just shows up time and time again, and I'm speechless. So many things are happening. I'm writing a memoir right now. Apparently, it's getting really good. I get a lot of great feedback, and even though I'm 6.5 years sober, I still struggle with that self doubt,
Hmm.
and self esteem. It's a lot better than it was,
Hmm.
but sometimes I do need someone to say like, "Oh no, this is good stuff," or just something as simple as "Your story matters," and
Hmm.
that's why I love this concept for the podcast because we all have a story. And even if people think that their events aren't like, huge or big tragedies, whatever, what people identify with is the feeling, those core
Yeah,
feelings. Like, oh, I didn't feel good enough. I never felt a part of. And that's why I try to tell my clients, like, you all have a story and you all matter. And don't let anyone tell you you don't.
absolutely. Let me ask you this. So you feel like some of those things kind of, those feelings are still there, but they've gotten better. How do you think they gotten better for you?
I think once I realized that the only person's permission I need to be happy is myself.
Mm.
I don't need my parents. I don't need friends. Love my fiance. I don't need his permission either. And it took me a long time to realize that and to have that confidence. And I think I always wanted to go into this field because when I was in treatment, a woman there that was my therapist had been through the program.
Mm.
And that was my first experience with anyone in recovery. I
Mhm.
had never seen it before because every therapist I had in the past, they were just telling me stuff they learned from a book. That doesn't work for me. So uh that does not work for me. If I know someone can't relate to me or they're not even trying to,
Mhm.
that doesn't work for me. But since then, and that's why I admire that treatment center so much, they all of their staff is in recovery. And I think I was almost jealous of that. Like, oh, I wish I could do that.
Mhm.
And I never had the confidence to pursue it because I wasn't confident in my sobriety at that
Mhm.
point. And since, personal development and exploration, and I can meditate now. It took me 6 years being sober, but I can finally meditate. And like it just doesn't happen overnight, right? Um, but I think once I was able to finally get into my body, the
Mhm.
thing that I was avoiding for so many years,
Mhm.
I can't ignore it anymore. I know I feel fear in my body before my brain.
Mhm.
And it's interesting once I found like what aligns with my future and what doesn't, I can physically feel that gravitational pull. And it's just so eye-opening. And my recovery, there's programs, spirituality. It's like a little bit of everything. I'm kind of a recovery hippie. but it works. And I think that's the key for people to just find what works for them. And, my recovery isn't gonna look the same as your recovery, but I can still honor your recovery, you know?
Absolutely. And, I think that's one of the biggest things that, at least nowadays, I think what's kind of catching on when it comes to, the journey of recovery is that people need to be allowed to find their own way
Mm.
and have their own experiences with things. For me, I've tried different things. Some things ain't for me, some things are. And, what does recovery look like to us, right? So you're no longer homeless. You're no longer addicted to substances. You have a level of comfort about yourself. What more could we ask for from recovery than that?
Right.
Because you may have heard it, the disease, right? Or the dis-ease.
Mm-hmm.
Just always uncomfortable and just like hamster wheel thoughts, need to find something to escape. Some of us reach for food, for substances, video games, cigarettes, whatever it is to escape. But then when we can actually just be, is I think the most important thing we could do, the connection, right? I'm sure
Yeah.
you've heard the opposite of addiction is connection,
Yes.
you know, connection to people, God, higher power, um, I think is the most important thing,
Mm.
So do you have a message for anyone listening?
I think for the longest time growing up, what I took on is I'm something that's broken that needs to be fixed. But in reality, I was just hurting and I deserve to be healed. And I think that's a core message that a lot of people need to hear.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Britt, I want to thank you for getting vulnerable with us and then with everyone that's going to be listening, because everything you shared tonight has power. And you know that, and other people are going to know that soon. And I really want to thank you for be completely, candid, honest with us and open, because I think that's really the only way people can feel it. So thank you. And
Thank you.
keep up the good fight, okay?
Thank you.
I would like to thank all of you for listening, and remember to always keep up the good fight.